Hi Dan, it's
Hello.
great to have you in London.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming here. Can you tell us what is WastED?
WastED is an attempt to create a restaurant pop-up with a menu that is devoted to capturing food that would otherwise go into the garbage or into the compost bin. It's also an attempt to broaden the definition of what we think about when we think about waste. Not just ugly fruits and vegetables and expired dairy, but foods that are wasted by virtue of our everyday diets. The 7-ounce piece of steak that centers our plate twice a day, 7 days a week in increasing popularity in Western cultures is a disastrous ecological imprint, mostly because it's so wasteful. The grain that it takes to feed those animals to get that protein-centric plate of food is not sustainable. And so one of the reasons to open WastED is to bring to light an expanded definition of what it means to waste. And that's been both a challenge and a learning experience, which is why WastED is WastED education.
How does WastED in London compare to what you did in New York
Yeah.
2 years ago?
The reason we launched WastED was in part in New York because the conversation hadn't exploded into the everyday food culture the way it has here in London. And it seems like around England, the consciousness about this issue is far ahead of where we are in America. Having said that, one of the reasons to come to England, come to London especially, was to see if we could push ourselves to expand the definition of what is food waste. So if I said to you that an ugly fruit or a damaged vegetable or an expired can of yogurt was considered waste, and that's what we were opening this restaurant for, I would say it's not worth coming to England. What we're trying to do is expand the definition of waste. You know, how do we look at, say, the juice craze that's happening here in London? I walked here this morning from my hotel. It's 3 blocks away, and I passed 4 juiceries. And we thought when we were coming here, what happens to all the fiber that's left over in the juicing process? Can we do something with that that's thrown away? And so we asked around and we got a bunch of fiber and we created a vegetable pulp cheeseburger. And that's an idea of saying that this low-hanging fruit of the ugly fruits and vegetables, say, is one part of the food problem, or the food waste problem. But quite a larger part is the culture that's created food waste through our choices. And one thing is the juice craze. It's created quite a bit of waste. So has the food culture around protein-centric plates of food. Eating lots of meat, say, where the architecture of the plate is a steak with a side of grains or vegetables. This in and of itself is waste too. We just don't think of it that way. We think of it as maybe not so healthy. We think of it as sometimes not so sustainable. But we rarely think about it in the context of waste. And the reason it's waste is because in order to feed the animal that gives you that protein-centric plate of food, you have to grow a heck of a lot of grain, corn and soybeans. And in England, you have to grow a lot of wheat because wheat is fed to animals. And so if you're feeding millions of acres of wheat that's grown here in England to animals, and then the animals feed us, well, that's very inefficient. And inefficiency is another way to look at waste. And on a scale that I'm talking about with millions of acres, that's a huge problem. So part of the issue isn't just capturing what would otherwise go in the garbage. It's also looking at how can we influence or shed a light on the everyday diets that by their very nature create a ton of waste. That's the challenge.
Sounds like ongoing thinking, like 24/7.
Well, it was a year in the planning, but we did a lot of research. Look, we started with what is England? What is the English countryside? Well, it's a dairy. The dairy sculpted a lot of the English landscape as you read through the history of this. So the question became, well, what happens on a dairy farm when a male calf is born? If there are a ton of dairy farms in England and it built, in many ways, some of the English landscape, then the question is, what happens to a cow that's born that doesn't give milk? That's a veal calf. Well, here in England, they're shot within a day of birth, and they're thrown away. Well, what if we created a culture, a food culture, that valued veal? Well, the French did it, right? There are other cultures that do it. The English, again, that dairy history suggests that if you want to enjoy dairy and want to keep the traditions of dairy alive in this country, you have an opportunity, and I would say an obligation, to eat veal. So that's what we did. We saved 7 veal calves from a dairy, and we asked a farmer to raise them on mother's milk and on pasture. And we're serving them as little McNuggets. We're doing it as McNuggets. Instead of chicken McNuggets, we're serving as veal McNuggets to say that there's a lot of veal if we want it. And we could even make it into a fast food item, probably pretty cheap, if we wanted to do it. But we have to create a culture around veal. That's the challenge.
So how many of these routes you need to try to pursue in order to come up with?
Your question, another way of answering the question of how many routes do you have to take to come to a solution on food waste, another way to answer that is you have to develop a cuisine. And the answer to that is the English have a cuisine. They have a suite of dishes. And I would say many more hundreds if you really go back in the culinary history, but they have a suite of dishes today that have lasted generations. Bubble and squeak, blood sausage, haggis, marmite. These are all dishes and products that are based on traditional waste. They just didn't call it waste. Bubble and squeak is yesterday's cabbage that you couldn't use and offcuts of potatoes. Shepherd's pie is offcuts of braised lamb that were unused. We use them the next day with the leftover potatoes. You make a potato puree, but you don't call that wasted. You call it shepherd's pie, and it lasts generations. It's also delicious, of course. So part of the answer to the question is we Americans especially need to create a cuisine, a pattern of eating that approaches food waste as a culinary dictate, as a part of our culture, in the way that the English have and lost, in the way that the French have and are losing, in the way the Italians have and are trying to hold on to it. This, I think, is the challenge, is that the pattern of eating, which amounts to a cuisine, helps balance the landscape so that you can't just have juices and milk. You have to have the pulp from the juice burger and you have to have the veal calf if you want to enjoy that in a way that's sustainable and cuts down food waste.
And with the recent political changes in the US, is it going to be even more difficult to try?
Well, I think on a political level in the US it's going to be very challenging, but that also creates an opportunity for activation, for engagement, because there are a lot of people where this issue, the train has left the station. There's no going back to big agriculture. I mean, while they may rule the food system today, we all know that within a generation or two, this is going to be very old news, you know. If I looked out the window here and I said to you, we were looking at a factory of billowing black smoke, and I said to you, that's the future of manufacturing, you would say, what are you talking about? That's the Industrial Revolution. We were dealing with that in the 1800s. A little bit like what I think big agriculture is about and what the Trump administration represents is it's old news. It's like melting icebergs. They're not going to be important in the long term. That's my view of it. So, but it gives an opportunity to people and chefs, restaurants, who feel strongly about this issue to engage and make their voices heard.
Coming back to the UK and to a short-term view. So last night was the opening night.
Yeah.
of WastED London. How did it go? You had a land cast.
Yeah, we had a very crazy evening for our first night. We had several industry people and reviewers, and then in the middle of all of it, Chef Ducasse said, "I'd like to sit down to eat." I said, "Okay." So it was. It ended up being a bit difficult on the team, but they were great, and we worked very hard, and I think it went over okay.
You also have an incredible lineup of chefs. How did you pick them? How did it come about?
The easiest part of this whole project was getting chefs from mostly England and a little bit around Europe. It was just conversations that immediately chefs said, "Oh my God, I'd love to be involved." Why? Because this issue of food waste is so important, but also because every one of the chefs said the same thing in a different way, which is, "Oh, I have something on my menu that would go well with this theme." Meaning every day I'm thinking about food waste and I'm dealing with it. We just don't call it wasted. We call it a special today, or we give it a ravioli with a stuffing from the night before. This is utilization of waste. Restaurants just don't get credit for it. And so part of the inspiration for this project was to shine a light on chefs and say, not only are we creative, but the creative craftsmanship can go towards environmental good, towards social good. And this is what this project is about. It's done, though, in a context of pleasure and delight, which I think is important. This is joyful and not a preachy endeavor.
Chefs are really busy schedules, especially high-profile chefs. Was there someone who maybe you both wanted to do it together but didn't work out?
No one. No. There was no chef who not really. No, I think we across the board got just an incredible reception. Yeah.
So let's talk about the menu. I counted 21 courses. Was there an overall approach in the way you conceived them, or it just came one by one, different?
No, it's
paths?
the initiative for the menu was based on suppliers. We talked to farmers, we talked to food processors, we talked to distributors, and the goal was to create a pantry list that we could work from. We didn't devise a menu and then work backwards. We got the ingredients first, then we created a menu. So it was very interesting way to approach the menu. We're really dependent on these suppliers for identifying the waste for us, and then capturing and then getting it to us. And this has been by far the biggest challenge. But the number of courses is just a reflection of how much we have been embraced by London chefs, farmers, purveyors. It's been amazing.
How did this compare to New York, to the experience you had, that more suppliers, less, more I don't know, more prepared?
We had more time this time. In New York, when we opened WastED, we did it 2 or 3 months before the idea came into our minds, and then we did the pop-up. This has been over a year and of a lot of work on the part of a great many people in Blue Hill, a big team, and a team over here. So it's a different ball game.
But culturally, the approach of the farmers, of the producers, how is it different from U.S., New York, and here?
I noticed a lot of similarities on the part of all the people who supplied us, and that had to do with an embrace of the idea. Whereas in New York, when we opened up WastED New York, I felt the same thing, and I was wrong both times, which is that these suppliers or processors, distributors, they're all going to be embarrassed about what they throw away, because we know there's a lot of waste in the system. And in fact, it was the opposite. They clung to this idea because they don't want to waste either, but they don't have a market for the fiber from the juice pulping. They don't have a market. So what do? They throw it away. They don't like throwing it away. And so when someone comes along and says, we might have an idea for a hamburger for it, okay, we're game, and we'll flip over backwards to try and get you it, because we want to participate in this and see where it goes. I find that very inspiring.
What is the rescue attempt you're more proud of?
The rescue?
Yeah.
What did we? I think the veal is the great one, because I think veal has the most potential to shape the landscape here and preserve it. The waste-fed pigs, I find we had a farmer who raised 6 pigs, but 100% on food waste, no grain. And the pigs the meat is delicious. It's really stunning. It took a little bit longer. It was a little bit more expensive, but it was an affirmation of what cultures and cuisines have been doing for centuries, which is feeding pigs just waste and then enjoying them sparingly. And that's how we're serving the pig, sparingly.
Some might wonder if it's healthy for pigs to eat only wastage. I mean, you have to do it responsibly, I guess.
Well, it's demonstratively much healthier for a pig. A pig was born to be the refuse distributor. That's the pig's job in the world. It's an omnivore like you and me, and it eats everything. We happen not to feed it meat scraps because the EU prevents pigs from eating meat because of some diseases in the past. But it's okay. It's much more the diversity of the diet that's so important for the pig. The pig enjoys a diverse diet like you and I enjoy a diverse diet. And a pig raised on grain, which is how 100% of the pigs are raised in the United States and here, is a diet of corn and soybeans. We should be more concerned about a diet of corn and soybeans than we are about a diverse diet of waste scraps.
So I'm sure you had been offered many opportunities to bring your food to London one way or another. Did you always have in mind WastED as your first experience here?
We never thought we were going to do WastED again. We've had offers from around the world, Dubai and Canada, cooking school, and California. There was a restaurant. Be interesting. Yeah. I just we done WastED and we said we're not going to do it again. We did it and we're not going to do it again. And then Selfridges called and we immediately thought this could be a very good opportunity. In part because downstairs below us is the world of fashion. And what is fashion at Selfridges? It really is an introduction to what will be required wear in the years to come. What you're seeing downstairs below us is what people will be wearing in 2 years or 3 years. And I like that idea immediately for a restaurant. What if a restaurant pop-up could be as avant-garde or introduce ideas around food that are outliers and that immediately provoke and inspire maybe and ultimately bleed into the culture, into the everyday food culture. In the same way that, last night someone was saying to me, people aren't going to be eating trash in the future. This is interesting, but people aren't going to eat this on an everyday way. Well, I said to the guests, 30 years ago, we were sitting here, and I said to you, there's going to be fast food sushi at the bottom of Selfridges that's going to be on a conveyor belt in the middle of downtown London. 30 years ago, you would have said, it's like me saying there's going to be a fast food shop eating insects here in a few years. You'd be like, that's crazy. But food cultures change very quickly, especially in Western food cultures, especially American food culture. We tend to go with the prevailing winds and quickly. And that sort of dizzying speed actually presents opportunities for change. And if food waste can become not an outlier, but a mainstream cultural acceptance, we'll stop calling it wasted. In the same way that coq au vin, the famous French peasant dish that takes a rooster whose meat at the end of its life is about as tough as that. And they figured out that to braise it in the acid and the liquor, alcohol of expired wine, it makes tenderizes the chicken. It's beautiful chicken. It's a soup. It's everything. And the same way that the fishermen's wives on the docks of Marseille realized that the damaged fish couldn't be sold, or the uncoveted fish that their fishermen husbands had caught couldn't be sold. So what do they do? While the fishermen were selling their fish at the dock, they were in the back making a bouillabaisse of the damaged and unsellable fish. And that lasted generations. They didn't call the soup wasted soup. They called it bouillabaisse. The list goes on. Every culture has not just one or two of these dishes, but most of the dishes are built from the most humblest ingredients. It sparks creativity and it sparks a kind of fervor for where you live, an identity that is marked by your environmental surroundings. To me, that correspondence between an old rooster and excess wine is a beautiful story about Burgundy. You can't tell that same story in Southern California, which is why these geographic locations are so important for the invention of cuisine and the invention of utilization of waste, because it so depends on what the environment is telling you it wants to grow. And then the trick is to eat a diet that corresponds to that without wasting. We don't have a lot of that in America, and increasingly we have less of it and less of it throughout the world because we're exporting our ideas, our westernized ideas of a plate of food from the United States to the rest of the world, and it's disastrous. We know that. Part of the solution is for chefs to help create ideas that counter that global trend. And part of countering a global trend is to create a culture around food waste. That's what the project is here at Selfridges. It's the culture. It's not the ideas so much, it's the culture. It's can you present these in a context of delight, pleasure, fashion that ends up bleeding down and out. That's the idea.
In these days here in London, how did you find the food scene?
I haven't been outside these four walls since I got here, except for my hotel, which is 3 blocks away.
Okay, so probably gonna ask you again maybe in 5 weeks from now. Last thing, well, you haven't been out from here much, but would you feel like this city would be a good place for the Barber-related initiatives?
Well, of course, I think London is a good place for any chefs-related initiatives because there's a group of energetic and very talented chefs and people who love good food. And in that sense, it's inspiring for any idea you have. And I'm thrilled to be here for WastED and to continue it, to have it live on and grow and become something different and something from which we've learned a ton from. Just by the virtue of learning about the English culture and history and how some of these dishes evolved, it's fascinating. And the food system that's in place now and that's needs to change. But it's not going to come from farmers and processors and distributors. It's going to come from the people who eat every day. And we've got to create the culture around how they eat. And to me, that's the biggest challenge. I'm thrilled to be a part of that conversation, at least for a few weeks.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, guys.
And
Thank
good
you.
luck the rest
Thank
of
you
the
very
days.
much. Thank you.